I never imagined that the people I married into would become the source of so much pain. The early days of my marriage were full of hope, quiet dinners, long talks about dreams, little inside jokes that only my husband and I understood. I remembered the first time he kissed my forehead before leaving for work, leaving me with that flutter in my stomach and a feeling that, finally, I had a home. Even the smallest gestures, a note on the counter, a cup of coffee waiting for me, a soft touch on my hand, meant the world. Those moments made me believe that I belonged, that love could truly be my safe haven. But slowly, the cracks appeared. His family didn't see me as part of their world. Not really. I was tolerated, barely noticed, constantly reminded that I was not enough. At first, I tried to dismiss it. Perhaps they were set in their ways. I thought, maybe I was too sensitive. I told myself I just had to adapt. But the tiny signs, the glances, the whispers, the laughter when I walked into a room grew into something impossible to ignore. It started subtly. My mother-in-law would joke about my cooking. My father-in-law would correct me in front of others, pretending to help but really pointing out my every mistake. Holidays became minefields. No matter how hard I tried, my efforts were always inadequate. At first, I laughed nervously along, nodded politely, and tried to brush it off. But each remark left a sting, an invisible wound that slowly festered. I began doubting myself, my choices, my abilities, my worth. I remember one Thanksgiving vividly. I had spent hours preparing the dinner, a turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green beans, and even a pumpkin pie. I had spent the morning perfecting. I had imagined the warm smiles, the small compliments, the sense of family enjoying a meal I had made with care. But when my mother-in-law walked into the kitchen and glanced at the table, her face twisted. "Did you even try? My daughter would never serve something like this." Her words hit me like a slap. My father-in-law chuckled quietly, and my husband looked down at his plate, avoiding eye contact. I forced a smile, trying not to break in front of everyone, but inside, a storm of humiliation and anger raged. I wanted to disappear, to vanish from their judgmental eyes forever. I kept asking myself, is this really what family feels like? The small daily slights were just as crushing. At breakfast, my attempts at simple meals were criticized. At family gatherings, my opinions were dismissed. Even my laugh was judged. Too loud, too soft, too silly. It wasn't just criticism, it was a subtle, constant pressure to conform to a standard that was impossible to meet. I felt trapped. I tried talking to my husband, but he was hesitant, torn between his love for me and his loyalty to his family. Each day, I felt more isolated, more invisible, and more powerless. Then came the day my mother-in-law's cruelty became almost unbearable. I was folding laundry in the living room, trying to stay quiet and invisible, when she stormed in, faced red with anger. "You are ruining everything," she spat. "If it were up to me, you'd be gone tomorrow." I froze. My hands shook as I gripped the clothing. I wanted to scream, to run, to make her see the damage she was doing, but I couldn't. I swallowed my fear, nodding silently, pretending it didn't hurt. That night, in the quiet of my bedroom, I cried until my eyes burned and my pillow was soaked. I felt completely alone, wondering if anyone in the world truly cared about what I was going through. It was then that my husband came home. He entered quietly, noticing my curled-up figure on the bed, my hands clutching the blanket tightly. He knelt beside me, took my hands, and whispered, "I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner." Those simple words felt like a lifeline. Finally, someone, the person I loved most, saw the pain I had endured for years. In that moment, a spark of hope returned. Perhaps together, we could face this storm. Perhaps I was not as powerless as I had felt, but the road ahead was unclear. Could we truly stand against years of manipulation and cruelty? Could my husband fully support me against his own family? The questions gnawed at me, yet for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life where the humiliation didn't control me, where I could live with dignity and peace. I thought about all the little moments, too. The times I had endured sarcastic comments at the dinner table, the holidays where I had been ignored, the subtle criticisms about my appearance and abilities. Each memory stung, but each also reminded me of how strong I had become, how, despite it all, I had survived. I realized that the spark of change had been lit the night my husband promised to stand with me. It was fragile, yes, but powerful, and deep inside, I knew that I would never allow anyone to break my spirit again. That as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I imagined the future. I imagined asserting myself, being treated with respect, and reclaiming my home and life. I didn't yet know how we would achieve it, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control over my destiny. For the first time in a long while, I drifted to sleep, not with fear, but with determination. The storm had begun, and I was ready to face it. The days after Thanksgiving were heavy. The tension in the house was palpable, like a storm cloud that refused to move. Every step I took seemed to echo in their disapproving eyes. My mother-in-law's criticisms had become more pointed, my father-in-law's judgments sharper. Even the smallest mistake, a crooked picture frame, a slightly overcooked meal, could trigger a tirade. I tried to move quietly, to make myself small, but nothing seemed enough. Breakfasts were the hardest. The dining table, once a place of gathering, had become an arena of judgment. "Did you even try to make this edible?" my mother-in-law would ask, tapping her fork impatiently. My daughter could do better without even trying. My father-in-law would chuckle quietly, adding small, cutting remarks. My husband, who had once seemed hesitant, now simply avoided their gaze. He sat silently, no longer laughing along, but not yet speaking up. I understood his fear. Angering his parents had always been his method of survival, but I also realized that silence was slowly suffocating me. I spent those mornings moving like a ghost through my own home. I folded laundry, swept the floors, and cooked meals with the precision of someone walking a tightrope, careful not to provoke criticism. Every small act was measured, weighed, and second-guessed. Even a smile could be misinterpreted as insolence. It was exhausting, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I began questioning myself constantly. Am I too sensitive? Am I overreacting? Should I just leave? But amid the humiliation, I discovered a quiet, stubborn part of me that refused to break. I began keeping a small notebook hidden in my room, jotting down every instance of criticism, every insult, every subtle manipulation. At first, it felt obsessive, almost paranoid, but soon it became a source of strength. Writing down the cruelty made it real, tangible, and most importantly, undeniable. One day, I would show these notes to my husband, to anyone who doubted me, or even to them. If it came to that, my husband's role during this time was both comforting and complicated. He tried to shield me when he could, a gentle word, a small gesture of support, but he also seemed afraid to confront his parents directly. I didn't blame him. The loyalty and obligation he felt were ingrained, shaped over decades, but I also knew that if we were going to survive this storm, we needed to act together. I needed him to find courage, and he needed to know that I could not be broken alone. One evening, after a particularly cruel comment about my housekeeping, I sat alone in the living room, clutching my notebook. My hands shook slightly, and tears blurred my vision. I felt small, insignificant, and deeply misunderstood. And yet, in that moment of despair, a thought emerged. I cannot let this continue. I am not invisible. I have a voice, even if they don't want to hear it. That night, I confronted my husband gently, not in anger, but with quiet honesty. "I cannot live like this anymore," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Every day, I feel smaller. I am exhausted, and I need you to stand with me." He listened, his eyes widening with realization. Then came the words I had been waiting for, softly spoken but resolute. "You're right. I've been too quiet for too long. I see now what you've endured. I will not allow this to continue." Those words were the turning point. It wasn't a dramatic gesture or a sudden confrontation, but it was the first clear sign that we could act together. And in that quiet agreement, I felt a flicker of hope, a spark that had been absent for years. Over the next few days, I began preparing, in subtle ways. I organized my notebook, categorized incidents, and even saved emails and receipts that showed patterns of control and manipulation. Each piece of evidence became a small tool of empowerment. At first, it felt tedious, almost obsessive, but slowly, I realized that preparation itself gave me strength. Knowing that I had tangible proof of years of mistreatment meant that I no longer had to rely solely on memory or emotion. The truth was concrete, undeniable, and ready to be used when the time was right. During this time, I also began noticing small shifts in my own behavior. I walked taller, spoke more clearly, and stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. Every minor act of self-respect was a victory, though often invisible to the in. I found myself looking forward to my husband's subtle support, a hand on my shoulder, a small nod during meals, a smile that reassured me I was not alone. Together, these small moments of affirmation began to build a quiet, steady confidence. One afternoon, while going through old letters and documents, I stumbled upon something unexpected. A letter from my husband's grandmother, written years ago, extolling fairness, respect, and loyalty to loved ones. Her words were gentle yet firm, reminding her grandson that family was not about control or domination, but about love and support. Reading those words made something click inside me. I realized that my husband's hesitation wasn't weakness, it was conflict between his upbringing and his values. And it gave me hope. If we could remind him of what truly mattered, we could stand together and reclaim our lives. That evening, we sat together, reviewing the notes and letters, discussing boundaries, and carefully planning our next steps. Each discussion strengthened our resolve. Each decision, no matter how small, became a statement. We will not be controlled, and we will not be silenced. And yet, despite all this preparation, I felt a mixture of fear and determination. Fear of backlash, fear of escalation, fear that my in-laws might react with even more cruelty. But determination outweighed it. I realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting in spite of it. And for the first time in years, I felt that courage stirring inside me as I lay in bed that night. Notebook in hand, I reflected on the journey so far. I had endured humiliation, manipulation, and control, but I had survived. I had found my voice, even if it was quiet, and most importantly, I had my husband by my side, finally ready to act with me. The storm was far from over. There would be tests, provocations, and moments of doubt, but I knew, with a quiet certainty, that the tide had begun to turn. And when the moment came to finally confront the cruelty and reclaim our lives, we would be ready. The days after my husband's quiet promise were unlike anything I had known in years. It wasn't an immediate transformation. The storm of cruelty from my in-laws still lingered, like a dark cloud that refused to dissipate, but something had shifted inside me. I felt lighter, not free yet, but lighter, as though the tiny ember of hope that had been smothered for years was beginning to burn again. I knew that if I wanted to reclaim my dignity, I had to act carefully, deliberately, and strategically. I began observing everything with a new clarity. Every word, every glance, every subtle manipulation became data. The times my mother-in-law attempted to undermine me, the ways my father-in-law tried to sway decisions, all of it went into my hidden notebook. At first, I thought I was obsessing, but I soon realized that documenting their behavior wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Preparation for the day when we would no longer be silent. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I hadn't even tasted, scanning through old family letters, emails, and photographs. I was looking for patterns, small hints of past manipulations, and evidence of favoritism or lies that had gone unnoticed. My eyes fell on an envelope tucked between some bills, yellowed with age. It was addressed to my husband, written by his grandmother. I hesitated, then carefully opened it. Her handwriting was elegant, deliberate, almost gentle. She wrote about fairness, integrity, and the importance of protecting and standing by those you love. She spoke of family not as a tool for control, but as a source of support and guidance. Reading her words, I felt a strange mixture of hope and sorrow. Hope, because it confirmed that my husband's values were aligned with hers, buried under the weight of family pressure. Sorrow, because I realized how long he had been caught between love and duty, struggling silently while I suffered. I showed the letter to my husband later that evening, careful to avoid confrontation or accusation. His eyes softened as he read, a mixture of relief and regret crossing his face. "I never knew she felt this way," he said softly. I didn't realize how much I've been holding back." I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "It's not about blame," I whispered. "It's about seeing the truth and acting on it." That night, we began planning, quietly, strategically, not with anger, but with intention. We listed boundaries, small but firm steps, to reclaim our home and our peace. We discussed documenting interactions formally, preparing for moments of provocation, and maintaining calm in the face of manipulation. Each plan, no matter how small, felt like a brick in the foundation of our future. But the most important discovery was internal. I realized, sitting alone late at night with my notebook and a dim lamp, that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers. It grows quietly, patiently, in the spaces between fear and action. I had survived years of subtle cruelty, endured humiliation, and still stood. That endurance itself was proof of resilience. And now, coupled with my husband's steadfast support, I understood that we could withstand anything they threw at us. Over the following days, I began implementing small steps. I stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. I asserted myself in minor decisions, testing boundaries. When my mother-in-law criticized my cooking or housekeeping, I listened politely but didn't react with panic or guilt. Each small act of self-respect, though barely noticed, strengthened me internally. One particularly tense afternoon, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Do you really think you can just run this house now?" she hissed. "You're too weak to handle it." I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm, steady, and deliberate. "I'm not trying to run anything. I'm asking for respect and decency, nothing more, nothing less." Her face contorted, ready to argue, but before she could speak, my husband stepped in. "That's enough. We are done tolerating disrespect in this home." The confidence in his voice stunned her. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across her face, a crack in the control she had wielded for years. And for the first time, I realized just how much my husband's quiet support could amplify my own strength. At night, I reflected on our progress. We weren't yet free from their influence, but the balance had begun to shift. The fear that had weighed me down for so long was loosening its grip, replaced by something far more powerful: clarity. I understood their methods, recognized their manipulations, and, most importantly, no longer let them dictate my emotions. I also found small victories in unexpected places: a kind smile from a neighbor who had noticed subtle tensions, a quiet moment of laughter shared with my husband after a long day of endurance, even the satisfaction of writing a detailed account of an abusive incident in my notebook. These were all reminders that the world wasn't entirely against me. I wasn't alone. There were moments of doubt, of course. I worried that my in-laws might escalate their cruelty, or that my husband might falter. But each time fear crept in, I reminded myself, courage isn't the absence of fear. It is action despite it. And I had already acted, quietly, thoughtfully, and deliberately. One evening, while reviewing our notes and strategies, I realized that this preparation wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming life, our life, my life. It was about creating a space where we could exist without fear, humiliation, or control. Every note, every strategy, every careful step forward was a declaration. We are no longer powerless. We are reclaiming what is ours. By the time Chapter 3 drew to a close, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: quiet confidence, not arrogance, not aggression, just certainty. The in-laws could still try to manipulate, intimidate, and belittle, but their power was waning. The foundation of truth, evidence, and unwavering partnership had been laid, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that when the moment came to confront them fully, we would be ready. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were preparing for victory, not loud, not vengeful, but deliberate, strong, and unstoppable. And for the first time in years, I truly believed that the storm would break, and we would stand unshaken. The house felt different that morning, heavier, as though it sensed the tension simmering beneath the surface. I walked through the rooms slowly, each creak of the floorboard echoing like a reminder that nothing would ever feel entirely normal again. My husband was quietly reviewing our notes at the dining table, glancing at me every so often with a look that said, "We're in this together." That glance gave me courage, grounding me for what I knew had to happen today. Breakfast was the first test. The in-laws were already at the table, talking in low, dismissive tones. I placed the plates down carefully, measured every movement, every gesture, but I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. I didn't shrink. "You're awfully quiet this morning," my mother-in-law said, her tone dripping with thinly veiled criticism. I paused, took a slow breath, and looked at her calmly. "I'm listening," I said softly, almost but with a firmness she couldn't ignore. The moment stretched. My father-in-law raised his eyebrows, expecting me to falter. My husband reached over, squeezing my hand under the table, a silent reassurance. I realized in that instant that courage could be quiet and still unbreakable. The tension built as the meal continued. Every criticism, every sarcastic remark, was met with calm, measured responses. I no longer felt the panic that had once paralyzed me. Instead, I felt a steady pulse of control. I had spent weeks documenting, reflecting, preparing, and now, the power of truth was at my fingertips. Later that morning, after the last plates were cleared, I finally decided it was time. The confrontation couldn't wait any longer. I asked my husband to join me in the living room. He nodded, his expression serious yet supportive. Together, we approached them. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. They looked surprised. Shock, confusion, and a hint of irritation flickered across their faces. They had expected silence, passivity, maybe even submission. Instead, they were met with confidence and preparation, something they had not anticipated. "About what?" my mother-in-law asked, her voice sharp, attempting control. "About respect," I replied simply. "About decency. And about boundaries that will no longer be ignored." I placed my carefully organized folder on the coffee table. The weight of the papers seemed to shift the energy in the room. I could see them glance at each other nervously, realizing this was not a casual discussion. "This contains documentation of every time respect has been violated," I explained. "Letters, notes, records. This isn't anger or exaggeration. It's true." My father-in-law shifted uncomfortably in his chair. My mother-in-law's smirk faltered. They had relied on fear and manipulation for years, and now that control was being stripped away by calm facts and unwavering resolve. "You've underestimated us," I said quietly, letting each word linger. "You've assumed silence meant weakness, but silence was preparation, and now we are ready." My husband spoke next, his voice firm, protective, and undeniable. "We will no longer tolerate disrespect. This household is no longer a place for belittling, manipulation, or control. You may have influence, but it will not harm us anymore." The room was heavy with stunned silence. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. The in-laws could no longer intimidate. Every tactic they had used for years, sarcasm, condescension, passive aggression, was neutralized by truth, evidence, and unwavering confidence. Over the next hour, we went through the documents carefully, calmly presenting each instance of cruelty and manipulation. Each note, each letter, each record spoke louder than any argument could. My in-laws tried to interrupt, to defend, to twist the narrative, but each time, we countered with quiet clarity. This wasn't about confrontation for the sake of anger. It was about truth, justice, and the reclamation of our home and dignity. At one point, my mother-in-law raised her voice, attempting to regain control. "You think this folder changes anything? You're just a guest in this family." I looked directly at her, eyes steady, voice calm but firm. "I am a part of this home now. I deserve respect here, not because I demand it, but because it is the truth." The words hung in the air. The finality in my tone left no room for argument. My father-in-law, who had always been the quiet enforcer, finally shifted in his seat, his expression a mixture of anger and reluctant acknowledgement. He realized that the old rules no longer applied. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the conversation drew to a close. My husband and I retreated to the living room, our hearts pounding but steady. The in-laws remained in the dining room, subdued and quieter than they had been in years. The battle wasn't over, but the first victory had been claimed. The first crack in years of intimidation and manipulation had appeared. Later that night, as I reflected on the confrontation, I realized something important. Courage isn't loud. It doesn't need drama or fury. Sometimes, it is quiet, measured, and deliberate. Sometimes, it's standing firm, backed by truth and support, even when the storm rages around you. And in that quiet, measured courage, I had discovered a deep, unwavering strength. I also realized the most profound lesson of all: preparation empowers. Without weeks of documentation, reflection, and planning, the confrontation would have been impossible. Without my husband's unwavering support, it would have been incomplete. And without my own willingness to stand firm, we would have never shifted the balance of power. The storm had not passed. There would be future tests, subtle provocations, and lingering tension. But the foundation had been laid. The rules had changed. We had asserted our boundaries, presented undeniable truth, and reclaimed the measure of control that had been stolen from us for far too long. That as I lay in bed that night, hand in hand with my husband, I felt a quiet satisfaction. This was not revenge. This was justice, patient, deliberate, and undeniable. We had faced humiliation, endured subtle cruelty, and emerged stronger, more confident, and prepared for the next chapter of our lives. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel truly safe, not because the danger had vanished, but because I had found my voice, my strength, and the unwavering support of the person I trusted most. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the climax of this storm, the ultimate reclamation of dignity, respect, and peace, was finally within reach. The morning sunlight streamed softly through the curtains, but inside, I felt the weight of anticipation. Today wasn't just another day. It was the culmination of months of preparation, reflection, and quiet struggle. I had spent years enduring humiliation, manipulation, and subtle cruelty. But now the moment of ultimate empowerment had arrived. My husband and I were aligned, united not just in love, but in purpose. As I moved through the house, I felt a strange mix of nerves and determination. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. Every step I took, every movement I made, was deliberate. This wasn't about anger. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity, respect, and the life that had been quietly stolen from me over the years. Breakfast was quiet, but charged. My in-laws sat across the table, tension radiating from them in subtle waves. Their usual jabs and criticisms were absent, replaced by an uneasy curiosity. They had seen small shifts before, the boundaries we set, the calm but firm confrontations, but they hadn't anticipated the culmination. "Good morning," I said softly, placing plates on the table. My voice was steady, calm, and deliberate. My mother-in-law looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Why are you so cheerful?" she asked, trying to probe, to unsettle me. "Because today, we speak openly," I replied, meeting her gaze, "and I will no longer be silent." My father-in-law shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his wife as though seeking guidance. But I had learned over the months that my confidence, combined with my husband's steadfast support, was more powerful than their intimidation. After breakfast, I led them to the living room, where I had laid out the compiled documents, notes, and letters that chronicled every instance of disrespect, manipulation, and control. My husband stood beside me, silent but resolute, his presence a protective shield. "We are here to set the record straight," I began. "For years, there have been moments of humiliation, of belittlement, of control. These are not exaggerations. This is documented truth." I handed them the folder carefully. Their initial smirks faded as they flipped through pages, read letters, and scanned notes. For the first time, the power they had wielded so effortlessly was challenged by undeniable evidence. Every instance, every manipulation, every act of cruelty was recorded. The air was thick with tension. "You've been keeping track?" my mother-in-law asked incredulously. Her voice was a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. "Yes," I said simply, "because truth matters, and because respect is not optional." My father-in-law opened his mouth to speak, but my husband intervened. "We will no longer accept disrespect in this home. You may have influence, but it will not harm us anymore. This is not a threat, this is a boundary." The room fell silent. My in-laws, accustomed to manipulation and control, were confronted with unwavering calm, preparation, and evidence. The usual tools of intimidation, sarcasm, subtle threats, guilt, were neutralized. This was not anger or revenge. This was deliberate, quiet empowerment. For hours, we reviewed everything. They attempted to argue, twist narratives, and defend years of behavior. But every word was countered with truth, documentation, and calm authority. I noticed the subtle shifts, the tension in their shoulders, the uncertainty in their voices, the flickers of doubt in their eyes. Their control, built over decades, was crumbling under the weight of truth. At one point, my mother-in-law's voice cracked, revealing vulnerability she had never allowed herself to show. I didn't realize," she began, hesitating. "It's not about realizing," I said gently. "It's about learning, about respecting boundaries, about living with dignity." My father-in-law finally nodded, an acknowledgement of the reality he could no longer deny. My husband placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, and I felt a surge of gratitude and love. Together, we had weathered humiliation, manipulation, and control. Together, we had reclaimed our lives. Later that day, after the confrontation, I reflected quietly in the living room. The tension had not vanished completely, but the atmosphere had shifted irrevocably. Respect had been established, boundaries had been set, and empowerment had been claimed. I realized that the journey had not been about defeating them. It had been about reclaiming myself. I thought about the months of preparation, the meticulous notes, the letters, the strategies, the quiet conversations with my husband. I remembered the nights of tears, the moments of doubt, the small victories that had built my confidence. Every moment had led to this point, not a moment too soon, not a step too late. The most profound lesson I took away was simple yet powerful. Courage is not loud. It is deliberate. It is patient. It is rooted in truth, preparation, and unwavering resolve. I had discovered a quiet strength within myself that could not be intimidated, silenced, or broken. And with my husband by my side, that strength became unstoppable. By evening, the house felt different. The air was lighter, calmer, yet charged with the knowledge that the rules had changed. Our voices, our boundaries, and our truth now held authority. My husband and I shared a quiet moment of triumph, not in gloating, but in relief, gratitude, and mutual respect. We had faced years of subtle cruelty and emerged stronger, wiser, and united. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on everything we had endured. I thought of the moments of humiliation, the subtle manipulations, the quiet suffering, and the relentless pressure to conform. And I thought of the small, steady steps we had taken, the documentation, the conversations, the support, the courage. Each step had been a brick, building the foundation of empowerment, respect, and dignity. I realized that life would continue, and challenges would arise, but we were no longer powerless. We had reclaimed our home, our voices, and our lives. We had set boundaries that could not be ignored, and established respect that could not be denied. And most importantly, we had done it together, united in love, strategy, and unwavering resolve. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace, not because the past had been erased, but because I had faced it, documented it, confronted it, and emerged stronger. I had endured humiliation, manipulation, and control, and I had survived. No, I had thrived. The moral of the story became clear to me. Dignity, respect, and courage are never given. They are claimed. Through preparation, truth, and steadfast support, even the most insidious cruelty can be overcome. And through patience, love, and quiet determination, the impossible can become reality. I drifted to sleep that night with a full heart. The storm had ended, not with vengeance or rage, but with justice, empowerment, and truth. My husband and I had faced the darkest days of manipulation and emerged victorious. And in that victory, I found the deepest, most enduring sense of peace, the knowledge that I had reclaimed not just my life, but my dignity, my voice, and my unwavering strength. If you've ever felt powerless, humiliated, or overlooked, remember this story. Stand up, speak your truth, and never let anyone dim your light. If this story inspired you, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more real-life stories of courage, justice, and unexpected triumphs.